Hello, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha. Welcome. Just a reminder that for the folks that have been on retreat with us for the last 9 days, that this is the normal also Sunday sitting period that we have regularly every week, and so there are going to be some folks also who have not been sitting with us this week who are joining us for the normal Sunday sitting period. And for those who are here from the Sunday sitting, just welcome, and just remind you, as in the email said, it's not the kind of regular program. Usually, we have a guided sitting, a short talk, and some time for questions and answers. And today it'll just be the talk that I'm offering today for our closing talk of our retreat. So welcome. It can often be mixed emotions for folks coming off of retreat, off of a more intensive period of seclusion and quietude and protection. That feeling of being kind of very vulnerable and a little bit raw, and knowing, that we have to go back out into the world in our more normal ways, relationships or responsibilities and work. And sometimes that can feel very daunting. In some ways, it's partly actually nice to have this group here, so that if you have been on retreat, just that reminder that these friends also await you. Next Sunday, we'll be back on our regular program, and you'll be able to come back and see one another in this greater sangha. And there's a goodness to that support and hopefully sense of grounding and connection and protection. And of course, we know as well as any of you that sense of how vulnerable it can feel, to move back out into the world. Even again, as we've been saying a few times in the last few weeks, months, of just with the COVID protections kind of ending and people being more exposed to other people and social groups, and the intensity of that, and understanding the rhythm and importance of seclusion and quietude and that kind of protection for ourselves. But also know that we don't feel like you're going out into the world unprotected. We rejoice in your protections that you're developing and have cultivated, and are so powerful and brilliant and beautiful. Of course, we all have our armors that we've inherited or we've built ourselves, consciously or unconsciously. And we owe a lot to that armor. These habitual ways of defending ourselves, even through greed, hatred, and delusion in our lives, have of course also protected us at times and helped us get through difficulties. And how beautiful it is to see people and witness and be part of the process of ourselves or others shedding those heavy armors, those rusty armors, stinky, sweaty armors, and how beautiful this other armor that you've developed, that is weighs nothing, that's never rusts, that has the sweet ambrosia of awakening. How wonderful to walk into the world with that developed, cultivated, cared for, tended. The Buddha said in the Attarakita Sutta, responding to a king who basically said this same thing, and the Buddha's agreeing. He says, "That's the way it is, great king. That's the way it is. Those who engage in bodily misconduct, verbal misconduct, and mental misconduct leave themselves unprotected. Even though a squadron of elephant troops might protect them, a squadron of cavalry troops, a squadron of chariot troops, a squadron of infantry troops might protect them. Still, they leave themselves unprotected. Why is that? Because that is an external protection, not an internal one. Therefore, they leave themselves unprotected. But those who engage in good bodily conduct, in good verbal conduct, in good mental conduct, have themselves protected. Even though neither a squadron of elephant troops, a squadron of cavalry troops, a squadron of chariot troops, nor a squadron of infantry troops might protect them, still they have themselves protected. Why is that? Because that is an internal protection, not an external one. Therefore, they have themselves protected. That is what the Blessed One said. Having said that, the one well gone, the teacher, said further, restraint with the body is good. Restraint, good is restraint with speech. Restraint with the heart is good. Good is restraint everywhere. Restrained everywhere, conscientious, one is said to be protected. Restrained everywhere, conscientious, one is said to be protected. So much of this practice and this path is the deepening acknowledgement and respect for and ability to access these inner protections. Knowing that we can't control all of the conditions of our lives, that even if we, had access to all these squadrons, that still we would be vulnerable to greed, hatred, and delusion, to unethical action. And so that there is some kind of safety and security and goodness that is available to us, regardless of the conditions around us, that can be brought forth simply through the virtue of our actions, the restraint of our harmful actions and these harmful mental processes that we are still involved in and trying to untangle, and then the unleashing of our goodness and all of our wholesome, beautiful actions in the world. These are such powerful protections. It's so important to see it phrased in this way, the name of this retreat of seeing security everywhere, that Michelle read from at the beginning of the retreat and at different points of time. Of course, we've offered that quotation from the Buddha of how the sage the awakened one sees security everywhere, even in a universe, in a world, in a body, in a mind that's constantly changing. The conditions are always in flux. Conditioned phenomena are therefore always in flux. This instability can cause a lot of fear and a lot of worry and a lot of grasping and a lot of these habitual ways of finding security in this or in that, but not in this, but not in that. And so this deep understanding that there is a possibility of seeing security everywhere, the relief of that. And of course, it's usually framed in terms of insight. That is the deepest security, the deepest peace that we can attain. There's a great sutta that we share sometimes about a cattle rancher named Dania, and it's a very beautiful kind of little archaic, some of the kind of language and concepts in it, but this side of idea of because it goes back and forth between this cattleman and the Buddha, and the cattleman is in his you know big house by the river, and he's wealthy and he has a lot of cows and his family is taken care of, and everything is all set. He feels secure in the way he has stabilized the conditions of his life. And then across the river you have the Buddha, who has nothing. He has no house, he has no covering, he has only his robes and a begging bowl. And this back and forth beautiful song honoring the desire for stability and also the recognition that the Buddha's stability is greater, no matter what, because it's not dependent upon conditions. And so one of the refrains Dania is always saying, this is done, everything, the rice is cooked, the fire is going, so go ahead, rain gods, go ahead and rain. And the Buddha just saying everything is gone. There's not even a fire, right? More metaphorically. There's no structure, there's no self, there's no home, there's no house. So go ahead, rain gods, and rain. Always this deeper peace that we're capable of through understanding and insight. That profound protection, of course, that we all are aspiring to have tastes of, some confidence in different ways. And yet here, this acknowledgement that actually also it's our actions that provide and can provide a deeper stability. The goodness of our actions, the wholesomeness of our care and generosity and patience with other people, and time, listening, whatever it is, like all of these good qualities, and restraint from harmful actions in body and speech and mind. A sort of willingness to not need to be satisfied in terms of ego in all of our interactions. Where are we willing to be kind rather than to be right, patient, spacious, just, all these things that help actually kind of break down some of our more difficult habit patterns, difficult for ourselves and difficult for others. And how beautiful to recognize the protection of that, the stability of that, the goodness of that. To understand that is how we are truly protected, is in our actions. The most beautiful armor, right? The most beautiful adornment, the Buddha sometimes would say, our ethical conduct, our generosity, our good deeds. And so our karma, And we sometimes it's important to recognize the relationship of these things with the practice of equanimity. The if you look at the metta chant that we do, or the Brahma Viharas of, practicing loving kindness and practicing compassion and practicing sympathetic joy, and the practice of equanimity is largely rooted in this understanding of action and the acceptance of responsibility of action and outcomes of action. And so this sense of confidence and protectedness in our restraint, or protectedness in our goodness, is not just in this the buoyancy of that. Of course, it is good. We need to be able to remember our goodness, remember our own kind acts, remember our generosity. It can help create a sense of upliftment, but also to understand that there's a that peace is accessible actually through that as well. The acceptance of the results of our actions, understanding that more than anyone, we are the inheritors of our actions and what is motivating them. When our actions are motivated by craving, aversion, delusion, that there are, of course, certain consequences. And those consequences we can see in the world many times, in our relationships and how it plays out, but that we also see in our own hearts. We also develop a taste for the peace that comes from good conduct, right? Not just the feeling good about ourselves, but the relief and the peace that comes from, oh, when we see that we have behaved unethically, when we see that we may have harmed someone through impatience or aversion or whatever, that we take responsibility for that in our own minds, in our hearts, but also hopefully in resolution, right? In engagement, in trying to heal, trying to apologize, trying to understand why we did something. What was it about the dynamic that made us distant from our aspirations? Can we start to understand ourselves more, even through conflict and hardship and places where we make mistakes, where we don't live up to our aspirations, which is going to be a lot, right? Of course. So, this sense of understanding action as a foundation for peace is also an invitation to explore, to understand it, even mistakes, even unskillful actions, unskillful deeds, right? It's the deeper calling of a reflection on karma, reflection on equanimity. Not only good actions produce peace, but also the investigation, exploration of unskillful actions, of harmful actions, helps us build peace. The acceptance of our responsibility around it, the acceptance of the wounds that happen in our own hearts when we are mean, externally or internally, when our desire for certain kinds of satisfaction overrides other people's sense of well-being, safety, health, security. It's a beautiful process of coming to terms. Not to get sucked into shame or remorse or regret. You have to have, there are healthy aspects of those things, but to not get pulled into the whirlpool of that, but as a way of understanding the burden of past action that's harmful, and as a way of inspiring us to be more careful and understanding. Of course, that's harder in the world. It's harder. It's hard on retreat, right? We all know, with perfect, quote unquote, perfect conditions, or largely protective conditions, how hard it is to still observe what's actually motivating the mind most of the time, or a lot of the time, what's actually motivating our actions so much of the time. This process of purification, of understanding, of inclining towards gentleness and care, We may come up short so much, but that on retreat, there's a way in which, of course, we offer the sense of exploring it. Oh, when there's aversion, when there's craving, when there's desire, explore it, feel it. There's some sense that because of the container of the retreat, we are more protected and others are protected from the volatility of our own hearts and minds. And then we go into the world and we don't have that same protection externally. And so there does need to be some more vigilance, right? There does need to be a sense of, oh, exploring anger has more potential consequences, right? In terms of like interpersonal action, activity, exploring greed, exploring these things. It's like, oh, where do we still have this understanding of the restraint that's needed, the carefulness that's needed, right? This dance and this integration of dana, sila, bhavana, of uh, offering of our goodness, restraint around the carefulness of our actions, of ethical conduct, and then bhavana, the practice of discernment, of mind cultivation, of understanding, of getting a flavor for the relief, getting a flavor for the goodness, developing a taste for those, feeling the pain of clinging, of hatred, of delusion, of distance that comes from that, being sensitive to that and requiring actually that continued sensitivity as much as possible, even in the world as we move into it. So we go into the world not only protected, right? The sense of, oh, protected through wholesome action or protected through restraint, but also actively trying to understand, actively trying to deepen our understanding, our practice. But that has to come with an understanding and appreciation. The conditions are different. We're not going to have the same kinds of protection as we do on retreat. The volatility is going to be there in a really different way. Um, the concentration just won't hold up in the same way for most of us. We're not we have too many other things that we're having to pull the mind to in order to make a living or attend to our responsibilities, or even sometimes as wholesome distraction when things get overwhelming. But so we have these defenses, and we also have the active side of um, deepening our understanding. In the Yoda Jiva Sutta, the Buddha offers this: endowed with four qualities, monks, a warrior is worthy of a king, an asset to a king, and counts as a very limb of his king. Which four? There is the case where a warrior is skilled in their stance, able to shoot far, able to fire shots in rapid succession, and able to pierce great objects. A warrior endowed with these four qualities is worthy of a king, an asset to a king, and counts as a very limb of his king. In the same way, a bhikkhu, a monk, and to reestablish what has been said to us many times by monastics in our traditions. When they say monk or bhikkhu, they mean everyone. They mean monks, nuns, lay people, anybody who's a yogi, anyone who's practicing. So remember that as the Buddha goes on and continues. It is the same way, bhikkhu. A bhikkhu endowed with four qualities is deserving of gifts, deserving of hospitality, deserving of offerings, deserving of respect, an unexcelled field of merit for the world. Which four? There is the case where a bhikkhu is skilled in their stance, able to shoot far, able to fire shots in rapid succession, and able to pierce great objects. A monk endowed with these four qualities is deserving of gifts, deserving of hospitality, deserving of offerings, deserving of respect, an unexcelled field of merit for the world. How is a monk skilled in their stance? There is a case where a monk is virtuous. They dwell restrained in accordance with the training precepts, consummate in their behavior and sphere of activity. They train themselves, having undertaken the training rules, seeing danger in the slightest faults. This is how a monk is skilled in their stance. And how is a monk one who is able to shoot far? There is a case where a monk sees any form whatsoever that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every form as it has come to be with right discernment as this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. There is a case where a monk sees any feeling, any perception, any fabrications, any moment of consciousness whatsoever that is past, future, or present, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far or near, every consciousness as it has come to be with right discernment, as this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not who I am. This is how a monk is one who is able to shoot far. And how is a monk one who is able to fire shots in rapid succession? There is a case where a monk discerns, as it has come to be, this is stress. This is the origination of stress. This is the cessation of stress. This is the path of practice leading to the cessation of stress. This is how a monk is one who is able to fire shots in rapid succession. And how is a monk one who is able to pierce great objects? There is a case where a monk pierces right through the great mass of ignorance. This is how a monk is one who is able to pierce great objects right through. Endowed with these four qualities, a monk is deserving of gifts, deserving of hospitality, deserving of offerings, deserving of respect, an unexcelled field of merit for the world. This fine tuning of our attention, of our skills, of aiming and sustaining the attention, of seeing clearly, of understanding the meaning of what we're seeing, and the virtue of our stance with which we're doing all of this. Such a beautiful, powerful metaphor, and how through this we're able to pierce this great mass of delusion, of ignorance. So important, especially as we go off of retreat and we enter the world, and you're not going to be, most of us, meditating as much or with as much sense of sort of support or quietude that you've protected around you. It is one of these things that feels like it goes most quickly is the concentration. That sense of just being able to kind of drop in, even a little bit, right? And I know that when we're yogis, we don't always feel like we're really super concentrated. You always see the places most often that you feel limited in your concentration capacity. But tomorrow you'll probably realize how concentrated you are right now and today. But this understanding of shooting shots in quick succession, right? That very helpful to remember that this is not just concentration where it's like you drop in and it's like whoa, 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 like, that happens, great. And it is a powerful kind of concentration, right? That's sort of fixed and absorptive and you really are there. But the kanika samadhi, the momentary concentration, the aliveness and the alertness and the flexibility of mind, that's so important, right? See, like this form, feeling, all these sensations, mental formations, consciousness, perceptions, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, all the things we've been learning to see. It's like you only need to see it for a moment because it only lasts a moment. And then there's a new moment, and then there's a new moment. So this sense of like you don't need to be able to have this idea that it's about sticking with this thing over time. That has its own benefits, its own skills, its own usefulness, of course. But when quick succession of attention is enough, right? Of momentary awareness, of keeping the attention light so that it actually can be with things as they're actually moving. That's actually much more available to us in our daily lives than we tend to give ourselves credit for, that we tend to even try. And how beautiful to use the Four Noble Truths as a practice of Vipassana. It's not something we necessarily offer a lot, but how powerful to recognize this is suffering. That 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 could be your main practice. Like, how helpful would that be to just recognize it with that simplicity in our lives, right? Of like getting worked up, getting frustrated, getting whatever, getting fixated on some future moment. It's like, oh, this is suffering. What is the root of it? Oh, it's clinging, grasping. Oh, that's the origin of suffering. And maybe not instantaneously, but over time, this ability to explore that and to see that with mindfulness, with the recognition, with the awareness, oh, the cessation, the cessation of suffering, the ending of it. Oh, okay, you see it, you see the grasping, there's some levity, there's some lightness, it's moved, and it's like, oh, it's gone. The heart is not entangled. And then the understanding of the path, that leads to this. What were the conditions that allowed for that recognition in that moment? What are the qualities that we're cultivating in our lives? What are all of the aspects of our minds that we're trying to support in terms of being able to do this moment of like, oh, this is suffering. What is the cause of suffering? Is it that I won't get this thing? Is it that this person was so annoying or this thing didn't go my way? Of course, there's that version, that way of telling stories, a way of translating our experience of reality. And then where is the internal sense? Where's the internal protection? Oh, there was wanting. Oh, there was shame. Oh, there was aversion. Oh, there's fear. And the fear led to this. The fear led to a sense of me that led to a wanting of something, whatever, right? It's like all the different ways that that can play out. It's like, oh, this is suffering. It's the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, the path leading to the cessation of suffering. What a beautiful practice of mindfulness. And does require a stopping, right? Does require a like, okay, we're gonna pull back. We're gonna stop the entanglement that we're building and creating and nurturing. And where do we step back and get a little quiet? Whether that's going into formal meditation or just like taking a break, even pulling back internally. You can still have your eyes open. You can still be engaged in a room full of people, but there's a pulling back and watching, right? Trying to get a sense of like from back here, what's happening in the body, what's happening in the heart and mind, giving ourselves that space for reflection. There, there definitely are ways that mindfulness makes life harder. It reminds me of that scene in the movie The Matrix, where Kind of gives Neo, the main character, this choice, to take the blue pill or the red pill. And the red pill, it's like you're going to burst the massive delusion. You're going to see things as they really are, which is like you're never going to recover from that. You're always going to have to live in that reality from now on, and it's a hard reality. Or you can take the blue pill and just go back to sleep, and you'll wake up where you came from, and you'll forget all of this ever happened, and you'll just keep cruising in the delusion. And there is something about mindfulness where it is in the long term, it's a one-way street. There's some part that you can never go back. You can't unsee what you've seen. The truth can only be hidden from you so much after you have seen really what the foundations and the dynamics of what's happening in the heart. Now, the pace of that opening, the pace of that development, it's one of these paradoxical things where we have a lot of responsibility to keep showing up for it, to keep cultivating it, to make sure that the mindfulness is a cause for greater strength and greater protection, and that it requires that, right? That there's some sense of understanding that until we fully deepen it, we've put ourselves in shakier grounds because we're acknowledging the shakiness of all the grounds. And of course, you can just stop practicing and stop coming on retreats and go live a reckless life. Of course, it might not always unfold in this lifetime, of course. And there's something can't be undone. Something about this that can't always get fully covered up. And so, how much better it is to try to follow it through to the end, while you are aware, while you are conscious, while you have the tools and skills and support and community and so many conditions so helpful right now in your life, even if it doesn't always feel like that. Of course, we can focus on the things that make it hard, which are many. Think about Burma right now, and of the many things that occur, there's this wondering of what is the impact on people's ability to practice things that make it harder. Are there also things that might be unperturbable? A steadiness of renunciation, of investigation, of a infrastructure of a social infrastructure of renunciation, that helps support people who still want that, for people to recognize the dukkha in existence and try to purify their hearts and minds. And then where does that leave any of us with our challenges, right? Does that mean, oh, with our challenges, it should be easier to awaken than what's happening in a country where the outer conditions are so much more volatile and clearly worse? That it should be easier for us? Or if somehow we have the notion that it's just as easy for them, or then do we wish harder conditions on ourselves to inspire us, to motivate us? Do we take the hardness of our lives that we have as inspiration, as motivation? Do we get out of our, as much as possible, our cyclical relationship to, the perpetual challenges we have in our lives, in our relationships, in our society, our world, our work, or not to dismiss them, not to say that they aren't things that we need to ameliorate and change and be involved in a dynamic way. But are we also attuned to the spiritual value of where things are hard for us, right? Not to be a doormat for other people's abuse, for greed, hatred, and delusion in the world at all, but to understand even our own entanglements, even our own karmic knots, these things that will get triggered over these days as you lose the sense of kind of the protection of your practice and you go back into more relationship, these entanglements of craving, of depression, of bitterness, of addiction, whatever, the most volatile things, of course, will arise. And do we have that sense of like, oh, seeing it, this is suffering. This is the cause of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path to the cessation of suffering. Can we have that level of ability to just unhook? Don't always buy into our perspective on our perspective, right? The view that we're hooked into of what's happening, of what's wrong with us or what's wrong with someone else or what's wrong with the world. It's like getting that you have to be very careful with buying into it, with pulled into that vortex of our sort of belief patterns that feel so true and so real, that harden our senses of ourselves, that give us that other kind of protection that's more brittle, that's more destructive, that has its value and has had its value to us, but that also can create harm. There's something so important about coming off of retreat and recognizing that it's not over, right? That the momentum of what happened during your time here, during this past 9, 10 days, that continues. And so that the next 10 days, the next 20 days, the next 30 days, I'd say at least that time. I mean, it's definitely longer than that, but to sort of have these markers of recognition of your sensitivity, of the vulnerability, of the awareness, these things still bubbling up, right? These still having power, still having momentum, even amidst the hardships of the places where it's perhaps also more volatile in our lives, more hard to find the security of the concentration, of the seclusion. But don't feel like it's just gone. Don't believe that perspective. Like, well, now it's just back, and now I'm just this, and now things are just back. It's just like be very suspicious of that sort of dismissal, and to be clear of like, what is it like in 10 days? What is it like in 5 days? What is it like in 10 days? What is it like in 15 days and 20 days? To see the ways in which actually the sensitivity, the vulnerability, the clarity, the truth, the taste for the truth, the openness to the truth persists, but that we need to be very careful with the way that we respond to it, relate to it, process it, engage it, that we don't always have the same degree of capacity to show up for it that we might right at this moment with all of this momentum, concentration, and protection around us. We have to switch our tactics on some level. And ultimately it is the same. Getting close to understand, but also moving away. It's so much what I have come to trust about the Dhamma that we live in, practice, and teach. That it's not just always about getting closer, getting closer, getting closer. It's respecting the resistance, respecting the place where we need to hide and run and protect ourselves and care for ourselves and soothe ourselves. Right? It's not always about intensity, intensity, intensity. It's not sustainable. Very, very rare. There might be times in our life where there's more of that and more capacity to be intense without being aggressive, to have the energy without having the contraction of the heart that's attached to outcome. So there's this different kind of warrior quality. The Buddha uses these metaphors of the armor and the squadrons of elephants, and where's the inner protection? And these warrior capacities of concentration and staying with and ethical conduct and the vigor to really recognize, especially in the world there is a vigor that's needed. There's energy and showing up for this in a way that's not wanting to be defeated by our own shadows, our own places of disequilibrium, our own places of entanglement, of confusion, of grief, sorrow, anger, but trying to understand them and understanding that we need to have a very careful relationship with that. Of course, I wrote a long treatise on the relationship of the kind of guerrilla warrior, right, to this type of attunement. It doesn't always feel, appropriate, or the energy of it can be kind of confusing to people. But I do think that this sense of understanding the courage it takes to go out into the world, and the courageousness, the energy, the inspiration we have, right, to overcome these hardships. But that also understanding that this warrior quality needs a different flexibility. Che wrote at some point, Che Guevara, another fundamental characteristic of the guerrilla soldier is their flexibility, their ability to adapt themselves to all circumstances, to convert to their service all of the accidents of the action. Against the rigidity of classical methods of fighting, the guerrilla invents their own tactics at every minute of the fight and constantly surprises their own enemy. Avoid the solid, attack the hollow. When engaging a stronger enemy, the enemy advances, we withdraw. The enemy rests, we harass. The enemy retreats, we pursue. This is the method that we've been practicing, right? It's like when we feel the sense of capacity, when the forces of mindfulness are there, and there's a sense of ability to engage even difficult things, right? Of course, we practice mostly in neutral territory. The breath, sound, or whatever objects we find that we feel like, okay, are not so evocative, not so intense. We try to be there. Something more difficult arises, we try to be with it. But when it starts to become more powerful than our capacity at the moment, that we learn to move away, we learn to withdraw, we learn to run, right? Whether it's moving to a more neutral object, moving to a pleasant object, giving ourselves space, giving ourselves rest, to understand sometimes people, it's like it's so hard for people. We spend a lot of time trying to convince people that running away, moving away, giving ourselves rest, protecting ourselves, soothing ourselves is good practice, right? Because people, consciously or not, are bought into this other warrior mentality that it's like it's always forward, it's always pushing forward, it's always connecting, and it's like not possible. There's just wanting, there's ego, there's pain fueling that. Where are we careful? Where do we leave the wound alone? Right? Where do we stop fiddling with it? There's a great story that uh, T. Lawrence writes about in their battle for um, an independent, Arab state, that all of his colleagues were fixated on liberating Medina from the Turkish rule and to put it back under Arab rule. And it was this very painful symbol to so many people that these invaders had taken over this city and that was like this, sacred, holy site. And so this sense of like, we got to retake it. And Lawrence is like, let it go. let's like leave Medina. Let them be there. Don't even worry about killing the enemy. Let's just destroy the railroads, right? That's the practice. It's like you have the deepest karmic knot around worthlessness and ambition and loneliness and whatever it is. It's like you just leave Medina alone over there. Like you going in and trying to like fix that and your agenda about how if that gets fixed, then you'll be free, and the symbolism of how this is my deepest place of entanglement, and that's where if I can undo that, then I'll be free, versus like you can't do that. You don't have the capacity to be with that right now. Let's just like work on building up, like destroying, getting rid of the infrastructure that power that has in our lives. Let's build up a little bit of like good, healthy moral action. Let's have a little restraint from our unethical action, right? The sense of that will dissipate when we stop feeding it, when it doesn't have the fuel to keep feeding itself, or when we've built up enough strength of our own goodness, when we've built up enough strength of our own capacity of mind to engage it with love, with care, with genuine interest, right? This exact thing that we've been teaching. If you can't show up for it with genuine interest, with some compassion, with some metta, you're probably not able to truly be mindful of it, right? There's going to be an agenda of wanting to get rid of it, wanting to run. And so these deeper parts of ourselves, these deeper entanglements, it's like we need to be very protected and aware of them, of course. And we can engage them when we have that strength, when we feel confident in our ability to be interested, to not think of it as the enemy, to not always think of it as a war, to fold it into what we love, right? To fold it into this heart's capacity. But that when we can't, we move elsewhere, right? We build up our strength in smaller places, right? We build up our strength on the edges and understand the momentum that builds in our lives. We build up the paramis, the 10 perfections of dana, generosity, sila, this ethical conduct, nekama, renunciation, panya, wisdom, virya, courageous energy, kanti, patience, tolerance, forbearance, satcha, truthfulness, honesty, internally and externally, aditana, determination, resolve, metta, loving kindness, upekkha, equanimity, dana, sila, nekama, panya, virya, kanti, satcha, aditana, metta, upekkha. You can pick one of them. So as Michelle was saying, a discipline for a week. Where do we choose a week to explore, right? And discipline can sometimes, again, have a harshness to it. If it helps, use that word. If it doesn't, let it go, right? This flexibility, it's like, don't worry about it. Like exploration of dana, right? Where do we spend a week where we're just being more generous? Our time, our energy, our things. What does it feel like? Do we really want to let it go after a week? Renunciation. So powerful and beautiful in our lives. Where do we incline towards the simplicity of not needing more, of not always needing things to be the way we think we want them to be or need them to be? letting things be the way they are, letting the heart experience wanting, experience the tension of that, and feeling the care for it, starting to develop that strength of not always feeling like we need satisfaction and sense experience, of the deeper satisfaction that comes with renunciation, simplicity. Kanti, so important, not just, sometimes it's translated as patience. And so that is its own beautiful quality, but also to know that it means also forbearance, of tolerance, of the willingness to undergo hardship rather than lay it out on the people around us, right? Spill it through words or deeds. There's a very powerful story I remember a long time ago from the Dalai Lama saying, that for and for him it was a long time ago, meeting some monks who had escaped Tibet and had found their way to India, and it was something he was seeing a lot of, and so he got a little bit complacent about the expectation of just like monk after monk, nun after nun. So it's like, okay, another, and he was talking to one, and this young monk said, "Oh, I was captured for a while and I was terrified." And the Dalai Lama said, "Oh, are you, were you tortured? Is that why were you afraid of being tortured?" And he said, "No, of course I was tortured." And he said, "No, I was afraid of getting angry." And the Dalai Lama was just really taken aback at a monk that he just hadn't kind of put much sense of confidence in, was blew him away with that powerful degree of carefulness, of renunciation, of just restraint and wanting to be goodness, and fear of anger, the wholesome fear, deep commitment to understanding the goodness of Kanti, patience, forbearance, of loving kindness, and the power and the stability of that. How fearful the stability that can come from greed, hatred, and delusion can be, and how beautiful, powerful, what a relief, the protection of ethical conduct, of generosity, of goodness, of acceptance of our actions, of responsibility for our actions, and of insight into the nature of the way things are. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. What a beautiful protection we all have. Let's sit for a moment. So thank you for your kind attention, your practice, your dedication to all these beautiful things. And for those of us joining just for the Sunday sitting. We look forward to seeing you again next Sunday. We'll have our normal um, program again. And for those of you who are finishing up the retreat, we look forward to seeing you in just about half an hour for the metta chanting and sitting and a little short closing offering. Yeah, take good care.